The frozen mud beneath Tom Hawthorne's boots cracked like gunfire as he trudged through the pre-dawn darkness, his breath forming thick clouds in the Wyoming winter air. He had no way of knowing that his decision to check the north pasture fence one more time before the approaching storm would shatter every assumption he held about reality, placing him at the center of a government conspiracy that stretched beyond the boundaries of known science. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The weather alert had been crackling through Tom's kitchen, radio since midnight, warning residents of Cedar Valley about Winter Storm Odin's imminent arrival. Channel 9's emergency broadcast system painted a grim picture of what was coming. Sustained winds of 60 miles per hour, temperatures plummeting to 30 below zero, and snowfall that would measure in feet rather than inches. For most folks, in town, it meant battening down the hatches and waiting it out. For a cattle rancher like Tom, it meant the difference between livestock survival and devastating losses that could sink his operation for good. Tom had inherited the 200-acre Hawthorne Ranch from his father 5 years ago, along with a mortgage that seemed to grow teeth every time beef prices dipped. The property sprawled across a valley where the plains met the foothills of Mount Sentinel, a location that had been in his family since his great-grandfather staked his claim during Wyoming's homesteading days. 3 generations of Hawthornes had worked this land, each passing down not just the deed, but an unshakable connection to the soil that ran deeper than blood. His German shepherd, Duke, padded alongside him through the darkness, the dog's keen senses alert to every shift in the wind. They'd been partners for 7 years, ever since Tom found the pup abandoned on Highway 287, half-starved and fighting for survival against a pack of coyotes. Duke had proven himself invaluable on the ranch, possessing an almost supernatural ability to predict weather changes and locate stranded cattle in conditions that would defeat most working dogs. The northern fence line ran for nearly a mile along the edge of Pine Ridge, where dense stands of lodgepole pines created a natural windbreak for the herd. It was also the section most vulnerable to damage from falling trees during severe storms, which was why Tom felt compelled to make one final inspection before Odin unleashed its fury. He'd already spent 12 hours reinforcing shelters, laying out emergency feed, and moving the most vulnerable animals to protected areas near the main barn. As he approached the fence line, Duke suddenly stopped, his body going rigid as he stared into the swirling darkness beyond the beam of Tom's flashlight. A low growl rumbled in the dog's chest, not the sound he made when detecting predators, but something different entirely. A tone Tom had never heard from his companion in all their years together. "What is it, boy?" Tom whispered, sweeping his flashlight across the fence line. The beam caught something that made his heart skip. A dark shape slumped against the base of a pine tree, partially covered by drifting snow. His first thought was that one of his cattle had somehow gotten through the fence, but as he moved closer, the shape resolved into something unmistakably human. A person, dressed in what appeared to be dark winter gear, lay motionless in the accumulating snow. Tom rushed forward, his mind racing through the improbability of finding someone out here. The nearest hiking trail was 5 miles away, and the closest neighbor was old Pete Morrison, whose property line ended a good 2 miles to the east. Nobody should be wandering around in this weather, especially not in the middle of the night on private property. Kneeling beside the figure, Tom carefully turned them over, revealing a woman who appeared to be in her early 40s. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue from the cold, but a faint cloud of breath indicated she was still alive. Her clothing struck him as odd, high-end winter gear that looked almost military in design, but without any visible logos or identifying marks. A small backpack lay nearby, its contents scattered by the wind. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Tom gently shook her shoulder, but received no response. Her skin felt dangerously cold to the touch, and he knew that every minute counted in these conditions. Hypothermia could claim a life faster than most people realized, especially with the temperature continuing to drop. Duke circled them anxiously, whining softly as Tom made his decision. The house was too far to carry her safely in these conditions, but the old equipment shed stood just a quarter-mile away. It had a wood stove and emergency supplies. Not ideal, but it would provide immediate shelter from the killing cold. As Tom gathered the woman in his arms, surprised by how light she felt, Duke suddenly barked sharply and pawed at something in the snow. Tom's flashlight revealed a metallic object about the size of a smartphone, but unlike any device he'd ever seen. Its surface was smooth and seamless, covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. Despite being buried in snow, it felt warm to the touch when he picked it up and slipped it into his pocket. The journey to the shed tested Tom's endurance. The wind had picked up dramatically, driving snow horizontally across the open ground and reducing visibility to mere feet. Duke led the way, his dark form barely visible through the white curtain of the storm, occasionally looking back to ensure Tom was still following. Inside the shed, Tom worked quickly to start a fire in the old pot-bellied stove, while Duke stood guard over the unconscious woman. As warmth began to fill the small space, Tom examined his unexpected guest more carefully. Beyond her unusual clothing, he noticed other peculiarities. A small tattoo behind her right ear that resembled a constellation he didn't recognize, and what appeared to be surgical scars on both wrists, precisely placed and oddly symmetrical. Her backpack contained items that deepened the mystery. A compass that spun wildly instead of pointing north, a notebook filled with complex mathematical equations and diagrams, and several sealed packets labeled with alphanumeric codes rather than words. No identification, no phone, no conventional personal items that might explain who she was or what she was doing on his property. As Tom draped his coat over her and added more wood to the stove, the woman stirred slightly. Her eyes fluttered open, a striking violet color that Tom had never seen before, and focused on him with startling intensity. "The alignment," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind howling outside. "It's happening tonight. They can't know I'm here." Before Tom could respond, she lapsed back into unconsciousness. He sat back on his heels, his mind spinning with questions. Who was this woman? What alignment was she talking about? And who were they? Outside, Winter Storm Odin gathered strength, and somewhere in the distance Tom thought he heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the night air. He shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of the wind. No aircraft would be flying in these conditions. The warmth from the stove gradually raised the temperature in the shed, and color began returning to the woman's face. Tom used his satellite phone, the only reliable communication in weather like this, to call the Cedar Valley Sheriff's Department. The dispatcher, Betty Carmichael, answered on the second ring. "Tom, everything all right out there? Hell of a night to be calling. Betty, I've got a situation. Found a woman unconscious near my north fence line. She's alive but needs medical attention. Can you send someone when the storm breaks?" There was a pause. Then Betty's voice came back, oddly tense. "Did you say you found someone? Can you describe her?" Tom provided basic details, leaving out the strange equipment and his growing unease about the situation. Another pause, longer. This time, "Tom, stay put. Don't move her. Someone will be there soon." "Betty, nothing's moving in this storm. The roads won't be passable until—" "Just stay where you are, Tom. Help is coming." The line went dead. Tom stared at the phone, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Betty's reaction had been all wrong. In his 3 decades of living in Cedar Valley, He'd never heard that tone in her voice before. Duke growled again, his hackles raised as he faced the door. Through the small window, Tom caught a glimpse of lights, not the random flicker of snow-reflected flashlights, but organized, purposeful beams cutting through the storm. Multiple lights, moving in formation toward the shed. The woman's eyes opened again, this time fully conscious and alert. She struggled to sit up, her gaze immediately fixing on the approaching lights. "They found me," she said, her voice stronger now but laced with urgency. "Mr. Hawthorne, and yes, I know who you are. In about 30 seconds, your life is going to change forever. I'm sorry you got pulled into this, but there's no time to explain everything. Just know that what happens next isn't what it seems." "How do you know my name? What's going on?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She reached for the metallic device he'd found, which he'd placed on a nearby shelf. "This is why they're coming. It's called a resonance core, and it contains information that certain people have killed to protect. The storm isn't just weather. It's cover for an operation that's been planned for months." The sound of engines became audible over the wind, heavy vehicles that had no business being able to navigate his property in these conditions. Tom moved to the window and saw them. Military grade, transports equipped with track systems instead of wheels, advancing through the snow as if it was summer dust. Behind them, the distinctive silhouette of a Black Hawk helicopter materialized through the storm, its rotors creating a localized blizzard as it hovered impossibly stable in the violent wind. "Listen carefully," the woman said, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "In a few minutes, they're going to tell you I'm a terrorist or a spy or something else that justifies their presence here. They'll say you're a hero for finding me. They'll thank you for your service to your country, and all of it will be a lie." The shed door burst open, and figures in white winter combat gear poured in, weapons raised. Their faces were covered by tactical masks, goggles reflecting the firelight like insect eyes. Duke snarled and prepared to lunge, but Tom grabbed his collar, sensing that any aggressive move would end badly. "Tom Hawthorne!" The lead figure's voice was female, muffled by her mask. "Agent Sarah Mitchell, Strategic Anomaly Response Division. Please step away from Dr. Vasquez and keep your hands where we can see them." "I don't understand," Tom said, not moving. "I just found her." "You've done your country a great service, Mr. Hawthorne. Dr. Vasquez is wanted in connection with the theft of classified materials vital to national security. Your property has been temporarily designated as a secured federal zone. We'll need you to come with us for debriefing." Dr. Vasquez, now Tom had a name, laughed bitterly. "Still sticking to that script, Sarah? Even after Phoenix? Even after what we discovered?" "Secure the asset," Agent Mitchell ordered, ignoring her. Two operatives moved forward, one producing a metallic case clearly designed to contain the resonance core. "Tom," Dr. Vasquez said urgently as they pulled her to her feet, "remember this moment. Remember what you see. They're going to try to make you forget, but the land remembers. Your grandfather knew. Check his journals. May 15th, 1978. He saw them too." The mention of his grandfather sent a jolt through Tom. Marcus Hawthorne had been known for his eccentricities in his later years, claiming to see lights in the sky and finding strange metallic fragments in the fields. The family had attributed it to age and isolation, but his journals. "Sedate her," Mitchell ordered. "Full protocols." As an operative prepared a syringe, Dr. Vasquez managed one last message. "The alignment happens at dawn. When you see the aurora where it shouldn't be, you'll know the truth." The needle found her neck and she slumped forward. The operative with the case secured the resonance core, which had begun emitting a soft hum that seemed to resonate in Tom's bones. As they carried Dr. Vasquez toward the door, the device pulsed with a brief, brilliant light that made everyone freeze. In that moment, Tom saw something impossible. The equations from her notebook appeared to write themselves in the air, glowing symbols that his mind somehow understood, despite having no knowledge of advanced mathematics. They showed a convergence, a point where multiple realities touched, and that point was directly beneath his ranch. The vision lasted only seconds before fading, but it was enough. Agent Mitchell had seen his reaction. "Confirmed exposure to active resonance," she said into her radio. "Subject Hawthorne requires full containment protocols. Initiate cleanup procedures for the entire property." "Wait," Tom protested as two operatives moved toward him. "This is my land. You can't just—" "Mr. Hawthorne, I'm sorry, but you've been exposed to classified phenomena. For your own safety and the security of this nation, you'll need to come with us. Your property is now under federal jurisdiction until we can determine the extent of the contamination." Duke growled menacingly, positioning himself between Tom and the approaching operatives. The shed, which had felt cramped moments ago, now seemed to shrink further as more personnel filed in, their equipment cases bearing symbols that matched the tattoo behind Dr. Vasquez's ear. "My livestock," Tom said, grasping for any normal anchor. "In this surreal situation, the storm, they need care." "Already handled," Mitchell replied. "We have agricultural specialists en route. Your animals will be better cared for than you could manage. This is bigger than your ranch, Mr. Hawthorne. This is about preventing a catastrophe that could affect millions." Through the door, Tom could see more vehicles arriving, transforming his quiet ranch into something resembling a military forward operating base. Portable structures were being erected despite the howling wind, and figures in hazmat suits had begun taking soil samples near where he'd found Dr. Vasquez. "The alignment happens at dawn," he repeated her words. "What does that mean?" Mitchell's posture stiffened. "Where did you hear that phrase?" "She said it. What alignment? What's happening at dawn?" "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us now. We can discuss everything at the command center." Tom's mind raced. 3 generations of Hawthornes had worked this land, and now federal agents were treating it like a crime scene or worse. His grandfather's journals, hidden in the attic of the main house, suddenly seemed like the most important documents in the world, if they contained what Dr. Vasquez suggested. "I'll cooperate," Tom said carefully, "but I need to secure the main house first. Family documents, financial records. Surely you understand." Mitchell considered this. "You'll be escorted. 2 agents, no more than 15 minutes. Then you come with us for full debriefing." As they prepared to leave the shed, Tom took one last look at where Dr. Vasquez had lain. The snow she'd displaced had melted in a perfect circle, revealing bare ground underneath. But the soil wasn't the familiar brown of his pasture. It gleamed with an opalescent sheen, as if microscopic crystals had been embedded in the earth itself. The storm seemed to part before their convoy as they made their way to the main house, an unnatural corridor of calm in the chaos of Winter Storm Odin. Tom sat in the back of an armored vehicle, Duke pressed against his side, watching his familiar world transform into something from a fever dream. Floodlights illuminated sections of his property he'd never seen at night, casting stark shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. As they approached the 2-story farmhouse that had sheltered 4 generations of Hawthornes, Tom noticed something that made his blood run cold. The old weather vane on the roof, a copper rooster that had pointed true north for over a century, was now spinning rapidly despite the strange calm surrounding the house. And in the windows of the attic, where his grandfather's journals waited, a soft blue light pulsed in rhythm with the remembered humming of the resonance core. Dawn was still hours away, but Tom Hawthorne knew with certainty that when the sun rose over Cedar Valley, nothing would ever be the same again. The ordinary life he'd known, the daily routines of ranch work, the simple satisfaction of caring for his land and livestock had ended the moment he decided to check that fence. Line one last time. What replaced it was a mystery wrapped in government secrets and impossible technology, with his family's legacy at its center. As the vehicle pulled up to his front porch, Tom made a silent promise to himself. Whatever the truth was, whatever his grandfather had discovered all those years ago, he would find it. The alignment was coming, and somehow the Hawthorne Ranch was ground zero. The convoy of military vehicles had transformed Tom's front yard into a tactical command center within minutes of their arrival. Portable generators hummed to life, powering. Banks of equipment that looked more suited to a NASA mission than a Wyoming cattle ranch. Agents in various uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, establishing perimeters and setting up communication arrays that bristled with antennas pointed skyward. Agent Mitchell led Tom toward his front door, flanked by two escorts whose faces remained hidden behind tactical masks. Duke padded alongside, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by a tense vigilance that mirrored Tom's own unease. The familiar creak of the porch steps felt surreal against the backdrop of military precision unfolding across his property. 15 minutes, Mr. Hawthorne, Mitchell reminded him as they reached the entrance. Agents Chen and Rodriguez will accompany you. Please retrieve only essential documents. Tom nodded, his mind already racing ahead to his grandfather's journals. The old man had been meticulous about documenting everything that happened on the ranch, filling dozens of leather-bound volumes with observations about weather patterns, crop yields, and livestock behavior. But it was the final journals, the ones from his last 5 years, that the family had quietly relegated to the attic after his death. Those were the ones filled with what they dismissively called Marcus's fantasies, detailed accounts of strange lights, unexplained phenomena, and his growing conviction that the ranch sat atop something extraordinary. The house felt different as Tom stepped inside. The familiar scents of coffee and wood smoke were now underlaid with something else, a metallic tang that reminded him of the moment before a lightning strike. The agents followed him closely, their equipment-laden vests brushing against the narrow hallway walls, lined with family photos spanning 4 generations. "I need to check my office first," Tom said, hoping to buy time. Financial records, insurance documents. Agent Chen, a compact woman whose eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, nodded curtly. "Proceed." Tom's office was a converted mudroom off the kitchen, cramped but functional. He made a show of gathering papers from his desk while his mind worked on the real problem, how to access the attic without arousing suspicion. The narrow staircase was located at the end of the upstairs hallway, hidden behind what appeared to be a linen closet door, a quirk of the house's century-old architecture that few outside the family knew about. As he shuffled through documents, the lights flickered, not the brief dimming of rural power fluctuations, but a rhythmic pulse that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Agent Rodriguez immediately spoke into his radio. "Command, we have electrical anomalies in the main structure. Requesting tech team for assessment." The response crackled back, "Negative. Maintain position. Resonance effects are expected within the convergence zone." Convergence zone. The term sent a chill down Tom's spine. His ranch, his home, had been classified as something otherworldly by people who clearly knew more about his property than he did. "I need to get some papers from upstairs," Tom announced, clutching a handful of documents. "My father's military records might be relevant given the situation." The agents exchanged glances. Chen spoke into her radio. "Subject requests access to second floor. Please advise." After a moment of static-filled conversation, Mitchell's voice came through. "Granted. 5 minutes. Maintain visual contact at all times." The stairs creaked under their combined weight as they ascended. Tom's heart hammered against his ribs, not from exertion but from anticipation. The blue light he'd seen from outside was no longer visible, but he could feel something, a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the attic above. "Bedrooms through here," Tom said, leading them into his parents' old room, now serving as storage for family memorabilia. He opened a filing cabinet and began extracting folders, all while calculating the distance to the hidden attic door. Duke suddenly whined and pawed at the floor. The German shepherd's ears were flat against his head, and he stared intently at the ceiling. Both agents immediately went on alert. "What's wrong with the dog?" Rodriguez demanded, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Storms got him spooked," Tom lied, knowing Duke's behavior had nothing to do with the weather. "He gets like this during electrical storms." As if on cue, a low rumble shook the house. But it wasn't thunder. The sound seemed to come from beneath them, a deep resonance that Tom felt in his bones. Picture frames rattled on the walls, and somewhere in the house, glass shattered. "Command, we have seismic activity," Chen reported. "Request immediate extraction." Negative," came the reply. "Maintain position. Phenomena is within expected parameters." Expected parameters. Tom filed away each piece of information, building a picture he didn't yet understand. Whatever was happening, these people had anticipated it, planned for it. Dr. Vasquez's words echoed in his mind. "The alignment happens at dawn." "I need one more thing," Tom said, making his decision. "Family Bible, it's in the hall closet." Before the agents could object, he moved toward the hidden door. His hand was on the knob when Chen grabbed his arm. "That's far enough, Mr. Hawthorne. We're returning downstairs." "It's right here," Tom insisted, turning the knob. The door swung open, revealing not a closet, but the narrow staircase leading to the attic. The blue light was visible now, pulsing softly from above. Both agents raised their weapons. "Step back," Rodriguez ordered. "Command, we have an undisclosed area in the structure, requesting backup." But Tom was already moving, driven by an urgency he couldn't explain. He bounded up the stairs, Duke racing ahead of him. Behind him, he heard the agents shouting, their boots pounding on the old wood. The attic was bathed in blue radiance, emanating from a source Tom couldn't immediately identify. The light seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, casting no shadows despite its intensity. His grandfather's trunk sat in the corner where it had remained untouched since the funeral, its leather straps now glowing with the same phosphorescence he'd seen in the soil where Dr. Vasquez had lain. Tom reached the trunk just as the agents burst into the attic. Their weapons were trained on him, but their attention was immediately captured by the phenomenon around them. The very air seemed to shimmer, and through the dormer window, the storm. Clouds were arranging themselves into perfect geometric patterns. "Don't move," Chen commanded, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. Tom's fingers found the trunk's latches. As he touched them, the blue light intensified, and suddenly he understood. The metal wasn't just glowing, it was resonating, vibrating, at a frequency that matched the pulse he'd felt from the device Dr. Vasquez called the resonance core. He opened the trunk. Inside, nestled among his grandfather's journals, lay three objects that defied explanation. They appeared to be made of the same material as the resonance core, but their shapes were different, one spherical, one cubic, and one that seemed to shift between forms as he looked at it. Beneath them, a letter in his grandfather's handwriting was addressed simply to the future guardian. "Step away from the artifacts!" Rodriguez shouted, but Tom was already reaching for the letter. The moment his fingers touched the paper, the world exploded into light and sound. Information flooded his consciousness, not words or images, but pure understanding. He saw his grandfather as a young man, discovering the first artifact while digging a well. He witnessed secret meetings with government officials, the establishment of monitoring stations disguised as weather equipment, and the gradual realization that the ranch sat atop something far older and more significant than anyone had imagined. The resonance wasn't just affecting Tom. Both agents staggered backward as waves of energy pulsed through the attic. There, radios squealed with static, and their electronic equipment began to malfunction spectacularly. Sparks flew from Chen's tactical vest, and Rodriguez's night vision goggles cracked spontaneously. "Code Black!" Chen managed to scream into her radio. "We have a cascade event! Multiple artifacts active!" The house shook violently. Through the window, Tom could see agents scrambling away from the building as electrical discharges began, arcing between the metal weather vane and the communication equipment they'd set up. The very air seemed to crack and split, revealing glimpses of something else. Another place, or perhaps another time, where the ranch existed in a different configuration. Duke howled, a sound unlike anything Tom had ever heard from the dog, and the vibration reached a crescendo. The artifacts in the trunk rose into the air, orbiting each other in a complex dance that defied gravity. The letter in Tom's hand began to glow, the ink rearranging itself into symbols that matched those he'd seen in Dr. Vasquez's notebook. Reality flickered. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, Tom saw everything, the true nature of the convergence, the reason his family had been drawn to this land, and the cosmic significance of what would happen at dawn. The knowledge was overwhelming, transformative, and terrifying in its implications. Then, as suddenly as it began, the resonance stopped. The artifacts dropped back into the trunk with soft thuds. The blue light faded to a dim glow. The agents, recovering from their disorientation, moved forward cautiously. "Sir," Chen said, her voice shaky but determined, "you need to come with us. Now." Tom stood slowly, the letter still clutched in his hand. He felt different, changed in ways he couldn't yet articulate. The knowledge he'd received was already fading like a dream upon waking, but certain truths remained crystal clear. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "None of you do. But you will. At dawn." Before either agent could respond, Mitchell's voice burst through their radios. "All units, evacuate to minimum safe distance. We have confirmation of a Stage 3 alignment. Repeat, Stage 3 alignment confirmed. The Hawthorne subject is now Priority Alpha." Through the attic window, Tom watched as the organized military presence dissolved into controlled chaos. Vehicles began pulling back, personnel ran for transports, and the sophisticated equipment was hastily packed. Whatever a Stage 3 alignment meant, it clearly terrified people who dealt with the impossible for a living. "We're leaving," Rodriguez said, gesturing with his weapon. "Now." But Tom shook his head, a strange calm settling over him. "No, this is where I need to be, where I've always needed to be." Chen reached for her radio, but it exploded in a shower of sparks before she could key it. The temperature in the attic plummeted, their breath suddenly visible in the blue-tinged air. Frost began forming on the windows in patterns that resembled the equations from Dr. Vasquez's notebook. "The alignment isn't just astronomical," Tom said, understanding flowing through him. "It's dimensional. And this ranch, my family's land, is the focal point, has been for generations." The house groaned as if in agreement, and somewhere below, Tom heard the front door slam open. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Not the measured tread of military personnel, but something else entirely. Duke growled, positioning himself between Tom and the attic entrance. "Hawthorne!" Dr. Vasquez's voice called from below, but it was different now. Multiplied, harmonized, as if a dozen versions of her were speaking in unison. "The sedative is wearing off. You have to prepare. They're coming through." The agents spun toward the stairs, weapons raised, but the frost was spreading across the floor now, making footing treacherous. The artifacts in the trunk began to again, their resonance building toward another crescendo. "Who's coming through?" Chen demanded. "What's happening?" Tom knelt beside the trunk, his grandfather's letter still in hand. The words were in English now, clear and urgent. "To my descendant who reads this in the hour of alignment, our family was chosen not by chance, but by cosmic necessity. We are the anchors, the fixed points around which realities rotate. What comes through the convergence depends entirely on who stands at the focal point when dawn breaks. Stand firm. Remember who you are. The land knows its guardian." The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Dr. Vasquez appeared in the doorway, but she was transformed. Light seemed to bend around her, and her eyes held depths that suggested she was seeing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Behind her, shadows moved, figures that weren't quite solid, existing in states between matter and energy. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her multiplied voice resonating through the attic, "it's time you learned the truth about Project Looking Glass and why your grandfather really bought this land." The artifacts rose from the trunk again, arranging themselves in a configuration that Tom somehow recognized, not from memory, but from genetic knowledge passed down through generations of Hawthornes who had lived and died on this land. The alignment was indeed coming at dawn, but it wasn't just an astronomical event. It was a doorway, and Tom Hawthorne, cattle rancher and unwitting heir to a cosmic legacy, was standing at the threshold between worlds. Rodriguez made one last attempt to assert control. "Everyone freeze. This is a federal—" His words were cut short as reality hiccuped. For a brief moment there were two of him, then four, then none. Chen screamed as she witnessed her partner phase in and out of existence before stabilizing in a translucent state caught between dimensions. "The convergence is starting early," Dr. Vasquez observed with clinical detachment. "Your presence here has accelerated the timeline. We have less than an hour before full alignment." Outside, Winter Storm Odin raged with renewed fury, but Tom could see that it was no longer just snow and wind battering his ranch. The storm itself was a manifestation of the dimensional stress, reality itself storming as multiple worlds prepared to intersect at this single crucial point. And at the center of it all stood Tom Hawthorne, holding his grandfather's letter, surrounded by floating artifacts, with the fate of multiple realities suddenly depending on what he chose to do next. The stage was set. The players were in position, and dawn, with all its terrible possibilities, was fast approaching. The attic air crackled with energy as Dr. Vasquez stepped fully into the room, her form stabilizing, though still surrounded by a faint prismatic aura. Agent Chen, still struggling to comprehend her partner's dimensional displacement, kept her weapon trained on the newcomers despite its obvious ineffectiveness against beings who could phase between realities. "Lower your weapon, Agent Chen," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice now singular but carrying undertones that suggested vast knowledge. "Traditional armaments are useless against what's coming. More importantly, we need every conscious mind focused on the task ahead." "You were sedated," Chen protested, though her aim wavered. "How are you—" "The sedative was designed for baseline human physiology," Dr. Vasquez interrupted. "I haven't been baseline since my first exposure to a resonance core 7 years ago. The injection merely gave me time to align my consciousness across multiple dimensional states." Tom watched the exchange while maintaining his grip on his grandfather's letter. The artifacts continued their slow orbit above the trunk, casting shifting shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Duke remained at his side, the dog's unusual calmness suggesting he too was being affected by the dimensional energies saturating the attic. "Project Looking Glass," Tom said, the name emerging from the flood of knowledge he'd received. It wasn't about seeing the future, was it? It was about seeing across dimensions. Dr. Vasquez nodded approvingly. Your grandfather was one of the original researchers, 1952. A young physicist recruited straight out of MIT after he published a theoretical paper on quantum resonance that caught the attention of certain government agencies. She moved toward the trunk, her steps careful, as if navigating invisible obstacles. Marcus Hawthorne didn't just buy this land because it was good for cattle. He chose it because his calculations showed this exact location represented a convergence point, a place where the barriers between parallel realities were naturally thinner. The shadows behind her solidified into three distinct figures, each wearing variations of military uniforms that seemed to flicker between different historical periods. Their faces were obscured by a dimensional blur that made it impossible to focus on their features. My team, Dr. Vasquez explained, noting Tom's scrutiny, volunteers from various iterations of Project Looking Glass across different timelines. We've been preparing for this alignment for, well, time becomes a meaningless concept when you're operating across multiple realities. Agent Chen finally lowered her weapon, the futility of her position evident. Command needs to know about this. The evacuation protocols. Your command already knows. One of the blurred figures spoke, its voice carrying the weight of authority despite its distortion. Why do you think they're implementing Stage 3 protocols? They've known this day would come since Project Looking Glass achieved its first successful dimensional breach in 1961. Tom felt the letter pulse in his hand, as if responding to the revelations. He unfolded it completely, finding that the text continued to shift and rearrange itself, providing information relevant to each moment as it unfolded. The alignment isn't just about astronomical positioning, Dr. Vasquez continued, gesturing toward the window where the storm raged with increasing fury. It's about synchronization across dimensional boundaries. Every 67 years, the quantum frequencies of multiple realities achieve perfect harmony. During these windows, travel between dimensions becomes not just possible, but inevitable. And something's trying to come through, Tom concluded, pieces of inherited knowledge clicking into place. Something that required my family to serve. And then what? Guardians, gatekeepers? Anchors, Dr. Vasquez corrected. Your bloodline has been naturally selected over generations for quantum stability. You can exist at the convergence point without suffering dimensional displacement. She glanced meaningfully at Agent Rodriguez, whose translucent form continued to flicker between states of existence. The artifact's orbital pattern suddenly shifted, forming a triangular configuration that pointed directly at Tom. The temperature in the attic dropped another 10 degrees, and frost patterns on the windows began forming complex mathematical equations. The entities attempting to breach our reality aren't invaders in the traditional sense, Dr. Vasquez explained, moving closer to examine the artifact's behavior. They're refugees from a dimension that's collapsing. Their reality is undergoing cascade failure. Imagine a universe where the fundamental forces are coming unbalanced, where matter itself is losing cohesion. One of her team members stepped forward, the dimensional blur around his face lessening slightly. We've been monitoring their attempts to escape their dying reality for decades. Most transitions fail catastrophically. The beings either disintegrate upon arrival or cause localized reality tears that we've had to contain. Roswell, Tom said suddenly, another piece of inherited knowledge surfacing. The crash wasn't extraterrestrial. Dimensional refugees, whose transition failed, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. Their technology was so advanced because they came from a reality where physics evolved differently. But without proper anchoring, they couldn't maintain coherence in our dimensional framework. The house shuddered as if struck by a giant fist. Through the frost-covered windows, Tom could see that the military perimeter had completely pulled back, leaving his ranch at the center of an expanding circle of calm within the storm. But the calm was deceptive. The air itself seemed to ripple with increasing frequency. "They're testing the barriers," another team member reported, checking. A device that resembled a smartphone but displayed readings in symbols Tom almost recognized. Multiple breach attempts along the convergence perimeter. They're desperate. "Or organized," Dr. Vasquez countered. "The patterns suggest coordination. They may have found their own anchor." Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the plummeting temperature. "Someone on our side is helping them?" "Not someone," Dr. Vasquez said grimly. "Something. We believe they've managed to influence events in our reality through quantum manipulation. Small changes, butterfly effects cascading over years, all leading to this moment." The letter in Tom's hand grew warm, and new text appeared. "The choice comes at dawn. Stand at the focal point. Let the land speak through you. Trust the resonance." Agent Chen's radio suddenly came to life, despite having been fried moments earlier. Mitchell's voice emerged through heavy static. "Immediate evacuation. Dimensional storm expanding. Hawthorne is the key. Must reach minimum safe distance." "They're abandoning us," Chen realized, her professional composure cracking. "Protocol dictates full withdrawal if dimensional integrity falls below critical thresholds." "They're not abandoning us," Dr. Vasquez corrected. "They're trying to contain the potential damage. If the breach expands uncontrolled, it could affect hundreds of square miles, maybe more." "No." The artifact's orbital speed increased, creating a low harmonic that resonated through everyone present. Tom felt the sound not just in his ears, but in his bones, his blood, his very DNA, responding to frequencies that human evolution had never encountered. "What happens if they succeed?" Tom asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "If these refugees manage to cross over?" Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances with her team before responding. "Best case scenario? Localized reality. Distortion. Worst case, their collapsing dimension doesn't just send refugees, it brings the collapse with it. Two realities attempting to occupy the same space-time coordinates could trigger a cascade failure in our own dimensional structure." "The end of everything," Tom translated. "Or the beginning of something else," one of the blurred figures added. "Dimensional merger could create an entirely new reality paradigm, but the transition would be," he paused, searching for words, "catastrophic for existing life forms not adapted to dual-dimensional existence." Duke suddenly stood, alert but not alarmed, and padded toward the attic's eastern wall. He stopped before what appeared to be blank wood paneling and began pawing at a specific spot. The wall responded to his touch, revealing previously invisible seams that formed another geometric pattern. "Your grandfather built more than just a house," Dr. Vasquez observed. "He integrated dimensional technology into the structure itself. This entire building is a resonance amplifier." Tom joined Duke at the wall, running his hands over the revealed pattern. The wood felt warm, almost alive, and he could sense mechanisms hidden beneath the surface. Following an instinct he didn't fully understand, he pressed his palm against the center of the pattern. The wall slid aside, revealing a hidden chamber that none of them had expected. Inside, a complex array of crystalline structures was arranged, in a pattern that mirrored the orbital paths of the artifacts. At the center stood a pedestal holding what appeared to be a larger version of the resonance core. But this one was partially transparent, revealing intricate internal mechanisms that defied conventional engineering. "The focal point," Dr. Vasquez breathed. Marcus Hawthorne didn't just study the convergence, he built a control mechanism. The larger core began to pulse in synchronization with the artifacts, and suddenly the attic expanded, its dimensions stretching beyond the physical confines of the house. They found themselves standing in what appeared to be a vast chamber that existed partially in their reality and partially somewhere else. Through the expanded space, they could see other versions of themselves, some from parallel timelines where events had unfolded differently. In one, Tom saw himself in military uniform, leading a special operations team. In another, the ranch had become a massive research facility. In yet another, the house stood in ruins, reality torn apart around it. The alignment isn't just connecting. Different dimensions, Dr. Vasquez explained, her scientific detachment cracking to reveal genuine awe. It's connecting different possibilities, different choices. Every decision that led to this moment is converging. The frost patterns on the windows, now walls of the expanded space, began moving, flowing like liquid mercury to form a countdown timer. Less than 30 minutes remained until dawn. The refugees are coming whether we're ready or not, one of Dr. Vasquez's team stated. The dimensional barriers are already at 15% integrity and falling. Tom approached the central core, feeling its resonance calling to something deep within his genetic code. His grandfather's letter fluttered in the energy currents surrounding the device, and new words appeared. You are the bridge. You are the choice. You are the guardian. What do I need to do? Tom asked, already knowing but needing to hear. It confirmed. Dr. Vasquez placed a hand on his shoulder. Stand at the focal point when the alignment peaks. The resonance core will attempt to merge with your consciousness. You'll experience every possible version of this moment simultaneously. And then you'll have to choose what? Which reality survives? The refugees need an anchor in our dimension to complete their transition. But providing that anchor means fundamentally altering our reality to accommodate theirs. Refusing means condemning an entire dimension's worth of conscious beings to oblivion. The weight of the decision pressed down on Tom like a physical force. Outside, the storm intensified, but now he could see it for what it truly was. Reality itself convulsing as dimensions ground against each other like tectonic plates. Agent Rodriguez's translucent form suddenly solidified, his dimensional displacement temporarily stabilized by the expanding resonance field. "Sir," he gasped, experiencing his first full breath in what felt like hours. "Whatever you decide, know that we're witnesses to something unprecedented in human history." Chen nodded, her training finally giving way to wonder. "The reports we file, if we survive to file them, are going to redefine everything we thought we knew about reality." Tom stepped toward the central core, each footfall resonating with increasing harmonics. The artifacts broke their orbital pattern and arranged themselves around him, creating a complex geometric framework that his mind somehow recognized as a dimensional stabilization matrix. "The choice isn't just about our reality or theirs," Dr. Vasquez said softly. "It's about what kind of beings we choose to be. Do we preserve our world at the cost of countless lives? Or do we risk everything on the chance of creating something new?" The countdown continued its relentless progression. Through the dimensional interfaces surrounding them, Tom could see the approaching refugees, beings of incredible complexity and beauty, their forms adapted to physical laws that had no equivalent in human experience. He could feel their desperation, their hope, their fear of extinction. But he could also see his own world, the ranch that had been in his family for generations, the town of Cedar Valley with its simple rhythms and ordinary lives, the entire framework of reality that had nurtured human civilization. At the focal point between dimensions, Tom Hawthorne prepared to make a choice that would echo across multiple realities. The Guardian's burden had passed to him, and with it came the power to save one world, or potentially doom them both. Dawn approached, with terrible certainty, and with it, the moment of ultimate decision. The crystalline structures surrounding Tom began to resonate with increasing intensity as the dimensional countdown approached 0. Through the expanded space of the attic-turned nexus chamber, he could see the barriers between realities thinning to gossamer threads. The refugees pressed against these failing boundaries, their alien forms becoming more distinct as the convergence peaked. Dr. Vasquez and her team had taken positions around the chamber's perimeter, using their dimensional experience to maintain what stability they could. Agent Chen stood beside Rodriguez, both of them now fully accepting that their training and protocols were useless against forces that transcended conventional physics. "The focal point is ready," Dr. Vasquez announced, checking readings from instruments that seemed to exist partially in multiple dimensions. "Tom, once you interface with the core, you'll experience temporal displacement. Past, present, and future will become fluid concepts. Don't fight it." Tom nodded, stepping into the center of the crystalline array. The moment his feet touched the designated spot, the resonance core blazed with blinding intensity. The artifacts that had been orbiting throughout the night suddenly converged, merging with the core in a display of impossible geometry. Beginning. "Primary interface," one of Vasquez's team members reported. "Dimensional barriers at 7% and falling. We have maybe 3 minutes before critical failure." Tom felt the core's energy reaching out to him, not physically, but through channels of consciousness he'd never known existed. His grandfather's letter, still clutched in his hand, dissolved into points of light that swirled around him before, being absorbed into his skin. The first wave of connection hit him like a tsunami of sensation. Suddenly, he wasn't just Tom Hawthorne standing in his attic. He was every Hawthorne who had ever lived on this land. He experienced his great-grandfather breaking ground for the original homestead, felt his grandfather's wonder as he discovered the first artifact, lived through his father's quiet acknowledgement that their family carried a burden beyond normal understanding. But the vision didn't stop with his family's past. Time splintered, revealing alternate pathways his life might have taken. In one reality, he'd never returned to the ranch, instead pursuing a career in physics that eventually led him to Project Looking Glass. In another, the ranch had been sold after his father's death, the dimensional focal point falling into the hands of people who understood neither its power nor its purpose. In yet another, he'd discovered the truth decades earlier, establishing an underground network of dimensional guardians spanning the globe. "Neural integration at 40%, Dr. Vasquez called out, her voice seeming to come from very far away. "Tom, can you hear me? Focus on my voice as an anchor." But Tom was already beyond the need for anchors. His consciousness expanded outward, touching the approaching refugees. He felt their desperation, their hope, and most powerfully, their profound difference. These weren't just beings from another place. They were entities whose very existence operated on principles alien to human comprehension. Their thoughts didn't flow in linear patterns like human cognition. Instead, they experienced reality as interconnected probability fields, perceiving past, present, and future simultaneously. Their bodies weren't discrete physical forms, but complex energy matrices that could reconfigure at will, responding to both conscious intent and environmental needs. Through the dimensional interface, he saw their dying reality. It was beautiful and terrible, a universe where thought and matter were inseparable, where consciousness itself served as the fundamental force binding existence together. But something had gone wrong. A cascading failure in their reality's quantum. Substructure was unraveling the fabric of their dimension, thread by thread. They didn't cause the collapse, Tom realized, the knowledge flowing directly into his awareness. They're victims of it. Their entire civilization is trying to escape. Obliteration. The truth was more complex than even Dr. Vasquez had understood. The dimensional refugees called themselves the Resonance, beings who had evolved over billions of years to manipulate reality through harmonic frequencies. Their civilization had achieved technological and spiritual developments that human minds could barely comprehend, creating a symbiotic relationship with their dimensional fabric. But their dimension's natural cycle had reached its end. Every universe has a lifespan, and theirs was concluding, not through catastrophe or mistake, but through the natural entropic processes that eventually claim all realities. The Resonance had spent millennia preparing for this inevitability, searching across the multiversal spectrum for a compatible dimension where they might survive. Earth's reality had proven uniquely suitable, not just any point on Earth, but specifically the nexus beneath the Hawthorne Ranch, where dimensional frequencies naturally aligned with their own resonance patterns. This wasn't coincidence. The same properties that had drawn the Resonance had also influenced Marcus Hawthorne to purchase this particular plot of land. The connection had been forming for generations, preparing for this moment. 70% integration, someone reported. Dimensional barriers at 4%. We're approaching point of no return. As Tom's consciousness continued to expand, he encountered an unexpected presence within the dimensional interface, a familiar mind waiting for him in the spaces between realities. "Grandfather," Tom whispered, recognizing the distinctive thought patterns. Marcus Hawthorne's consciousness hadn't fully died with his body. A portion had been preserved within the dimensional technologies he'd built into the ranch, waiting for this precise moment when the barriers would thin enough for communication. "You've done well, Tom," his grandfather's presence conveyed, not in words but in pure understanding. "Better than I could have hoped, but there's something about the Resonance that no one from our side has discovered, something crucial to your decision." Before Tom could ask, his grandfather's preserved consciousness opened a pathway to knowledge that had been hidden from Earth's researchers. The Resonance weren't simply seeking refuge, they were carrying something precious. Their dimension had developed cosmic technologies unlike anything in Earth's reality, including the means to preserve dimensional integrity against entropic decay. They don't just need sanctuary, Tom's expanded awareness realized. They're offering a gift in exchange, the knowledge to preserve our dimension when its natural cycle eventually concludes. This changed everything. The choice before him wasn't simply whether to protect his reality at the cost of another or to risk his world to save refugees. It was a decision with implications stretching billions of years into the future. The potential preservation of all human consciousness when Earth's dimensional clock eventually wound down. "Full integration achieved," Dr. Vasquez announced. "Tom, the choice is yours. The core will respond to your will." The storm outside reached a crescendo as the convergence peaked. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. But Tom hesitated, sensing something amiss. Through his expanded consciousness, he detected discordant frequencies within the approaching resonance, patterns that didn't match the harmonious signatures of the others. Among the refugees were entities with different intentions, using the Exodus as cover for their own purposes. "There's a faction among them," Tom announced, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he was speaking from multiple dimensional states simultaneously. "They don't seek coexistence, they want dominance." Dr. Vasquez's eyes widened. "Can you identify them, separate them from the genuine refugees?" "Yes," Tom said, his consciousness diving deeper into the dimensional interface. "But there's another problem. Our side has its own faction working against us." In that moment, one of Dr. Vasquez's team members moved with blinding speed. Before anyone could react, he'd grabbed Agent Chen, pressing a device against her temple that immediately caused her to freeze in place, her eyes wide with horror. "Very perceptive, Mr. Hawthorne," the man said, his form losing the dimensional blur to reveal someone Tom recognized, Secretary Wilson, the elusive head of the Strategic Anomaly Response Division. "But I'm afraid you're too late to stop what's already in motion." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her expression hardening. "Lucas, what are you doing?" "Securing humanity's future," Wilson replied calmly. "The Resonants have technologies that could advance our civilization by millennia, but we need more than the scraps they're offering as gratitude for sanctuary. We need full access to their knowledge." "You've made a deal with the separatist faction," Dr. Vasquez realized. "You're going to let them through without constraints." Wilson smiled coldly. "A more accurate description would be a mutually beneficial arrangement. They provide advanced technologies. We provide exclusive access to this dimensional nexus. Both sides get what they want. And both sides lose everything that matters," Tom countered. "Still connected to the core. Their faction will destroy the refugees who don't align with their goals, and their technology will remake our reality in ways that will eventually render it uninhabitable for unmodified humans." "Progress requires sacrifice," Wilson shrugged. "Evolution isn't gentle, Dr. Vasquez. You of all people should understand that." Through his expanded consciousness, Tom could see the full scope of Wilson's betrayal. For years, he'd been subtly sabotaging Project Looking Glass, redirecting resources towards secret communications with the resonant separatists. The technologies he'd received in exchange had already been deployed in classified military applications, creating weapons that operated on principles beyond conventional physics. "You're not even human anymore," Tom stated, perceiving the subtle alterations in Wilson's quantum signature. "They've already changed you." "Improved me," Wilson corrected. "Enhanced my perception, expanded my lifespan, freed me from the limitations of linear time. The modifications are liberating." As he spoke, Wilson began to change. His form shifted subtly, revealing a hybrid physiology that incorporated resonant energy patterns within human biological structures. His eyes took on an unnatural luminescence, and the air around him distorted with each movement. "The convergence is happening whether you cooperate or not, Hawthorne," Wilson stated. "The only question is whether you'll be remembered as the man who facilitated humanity's greatest evolutionary leap, or as an obstacle that was removed." Agent Rodriguez, still adapting to his restored dimensional stability, moved to free Chen, but Wilson gestured casually. Rodriguez's form immediately began to flicker, his dimensional displacement returning with painful intensity. "I control the resonance frequencies in this chamber," Wilson explained. "Your continued existence in this reality is entirely at my discretion." Tom needed to act quickly. Through the core, he could sense the approaching separatist faction, growing stronger, their discordant frequencies threatening to overtake the legitimate refugees. If they breached the dimensional barrier under current conditions, Wilson would gain control of the Nexus. But Tom's connection to the core offered possibilities that Wilson hadn't anticipated. Through his expanded consciousness, he reached out to Duke, who had remained watchful throughout the confrontation. The German Shepherd's genetics had been subtly altered through generations of exposure to the dimensional energies emanating from the ranch. Changes that had given him heightened sensitivity to dimensional fluctuations. "Duke," Tom communicated, silently, sending concepts rather than words. "The corner cabinet, now." The dog moved with unexpected speed, darting to a section of the expanded chamber where an antique cabinet stood. Before Wilson could react, Duke knocked it over with his shoulder, breaking its fall with his body to avoid damaging what was inside. The cabinet doors burst open, revealing a collection of smaller artifacts that Marcus Hawthorne had hidden decades earlier, emergency measures designed specifically for scenarios like this. "Stop that animal!" Wilson commanded, but he was too late. The artifacts activated upon exposure to the chamber's energies, releasing a counter-frequency that temporarily disrupted Wilson's control. Agent Chen gasped as she was released from his hold, collapsing to the floor. Rodriguez's form stabilized again, the painful displacement subsiding. Tom seized the moment, directing the core's energy toward the approaching dimensional breach. He couldn't close it completely. The convergence had progressed too far, but he could selectively filter what came through. "I'm inverting the resonance." "He failed," he announced. "Separatists will be blocked. Legitimate refugees granted passage." Wilson lunged toward the core, his hybrid form moving with impossible speed. "You don't have the expertise to attempt something that complex. You'll shatter both dimensional boundaries." But Tom wasn't operating on human understanding anymore. His consciousness had expanded to encompass knowledge from multiple sources: his grandfather's preserved memories, the core's accumulated data, and the resonance's own transmitted wisdom. He understood dimensional mechanics at levels Wilson couldn't comprehend despite his enhancements. The chamber began to vibrate as Tom implemented his strategy. The crystalline structures surrounding them reconfigured, creating a complex filtration system that identified and sorted dimensional signatures. Legitimate refugees were channeled towards stable entry points, while separatists were redirected to containment fields. "You're making a mistake," Wilson said, his voice distorting as his enhancements struggled against Tom's countermeasures. "They've deceived you. The so-called legitimate refugees are just as dangerous." "The difference," Tom replied, his consciousness balanced between human limitations and multidimensional awareness, "is their intentions. They seek coexistence. Your allies seek dominance. And intention shapes reality at the quantum level." Dr. Vasquez moved to assist, directing her remaining loyal team members to stabilize the chamber's expanding energy fields. "The resonance pattern is holding," she reported. "Selective filtration is working." Outside, the storm reached supernatural intensity as the dimensional convergence hit its peak. The entire ranch vibrated with energies that blurred the boundaries between states of matter. Through the windows, they could see the first legitimate refugees materializing, translucent, forms that seemed to solidify as they adapted to Earth's physical laws. Wilson made one final, desperate attempt to regain control. He activated hidden implants within his modified physiology, generating interference patterns designed to disrupt Tom's connection to the core. "You think you understand what's happening?" Wilson snarled, his human appearance falling away completely to reveal the extent of his modifications. "But you're just a farmer playing with forces beyond your comprehension. The separatists aren't the threat, they're the salvation. Our reality is dying too, just more slowly. Without their technologies, humanity will be extinct within 1,000 years." "You're wrong," Tom countered, maintaining his connection despite Wilson's interference. "Our reality isn't dying. It's evolving, just as it always has. And evolution works best through cooperation, not dominance." As he spoke, Tom directed a surge of energy through the core, creating a localized resonance field that neutralized Wilson's enhancements. The modified SARD director collapsed, his hybrid systems overwhelmed by frequencies they couldn't process. "Containment teams, secure Wilson," Dr. Vasquez ordered. "Complete quantum isolation protocols." With Wilson neutralized, Tom could focus fully on managing the dimensional convergence. The process was delicate and dangerous. Even the slightest miscalculation could cause catastrophic failure in both realities. But his connection to the ranch itself provided an advantage. Generations of Hawthornes had subtly aligned themselves with this land's unique properties, creating a genetic resonance that stabilized the process. "The first wave is coming through," Dr. Vasquez announced, her scientific detachment giving. "A way to wonder. Stable manifestation confirmed. Through the dimensional interface, the leading edge of refugees began to materialize within the expanded chamber. Their forms defied easy description, patterns of energy and matter that constantly reconfigured while maintaining coherent identity. They communicated not through sound, but through modulated frequency emissions that translated directly into conceptual understanding for anyone within range. Gratitude, came the first transmission. Sanctuary, covenant. Tom responded through the core, projecting concepts rather than words. Welcome, safety, conditions. The exchange continued at speeds impossible for conventional communication, establishing parameters for coexistence. The refugees agreed to limitations on their influence, confined initially to the ranch property until proper integration protocols could be developed. In exchange, they would begin sharing non-disruptive technologies that could address Earth's most pressing problems: climate stabilization, disease management, and sustainable energy. Meanwhile, the separatist faction remained trapped in the filtration field, their discordant frequencies contained by the resonance barriers Tom had established. They would require more permanent solutions, but for now, the immediate threat was neutralized. As the convergence began to stabilize, Tom's expanded consciousness detected another presence approaching through the dimensional interface, not a resonant, but something else entirely. A being of ancient power and vast intelligence, its signature, suggesting it had existed since the earliest moments of cosmic formation. Guardian, it communicated directly to Tom's consciousness. You have done well. The balance is maintained. Who are you? Tom asked, sensing that this entity far exceeded even the advanced resonance in complexity and power. I am the custodian, the entity replied, one of many who monitor dimensional transitions across the multiverse. Your actions here have preserved patterns that span billions of years of careful development. Through the connection, Tom glimpsed the greater reality this being represented, a cosmic ecology of dimensions rising, evolving, and eventually transitioning, their energies and consciousness preserved through carefully managed convergences. The Resonants were not the first refugees to find sanctuary in Earth's reality, nor would they be the last. Each transition enriched the receiving dimension while preserving the essence of the fading one. Your grandfather understood portions of this greater pattern, the custodian continued. His preparations made this transition possible, but the work is not complete. The separatists must be properly contained, and the refugees must be guided through their adaptation. Are you offering to help? Tom asked. No, the custodian replied. I am confirming your role. The Hawthorne bloodline has been part of Earth's custodial network for generations. Though few in your family fully understood their purpose, you are the first to achieve complete awareness. The choice to accept this responsibility remains yours. The implications were staggering. Tom's family hadn't simply stumbled upon a dimensional convergence point by chance. They had been selected, perhaps even subtly guided, to serve as dimensional guardians, their genetics gradually adapting to interface with forces beyond human comprehension. As dawn approached, the convergence reached a state of temporary stability. The chamber's dimensions began to normalize, the expanded space gradually returning to the physical constraints of the attic. The first wave of refugees had successfully transitioned, their forms adapting to Earth's reality while retaining their essential nature. Dr. Vasquez approached Tom as he finally disconnected from the core, his consciousness returning to human. Parameters, though, forever altered by the experience. What you did was impossible, she said quietly. Selective dimensional filtration has been a theoretical concept for decades. No one has ever successfully implemented it. Tom smiled wearily. I had help. More than you know. Wilson had been secured by the remaining loyal agents, his hybrid form contained within a stasis field generated by one of the artifacts Duke had revealed. The separatist faction remained trapped in dimensional suspension, awaiting more permanent resolution. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the Hawthorne ranch, but the sunrise revealed a landscape subtly transformed. The physical structures remained, the house, barn, and outbuildings standing where they always had, but the quality of reality surrounding them had changed. Colors seemed richer, more profound. The air itself appeared to shimmer with possibilities previously invisible to human perception. The refugees had begun establishing their presence, creating habitation zones that existed simultaneously within and adjacent to conventional reality. Their structures resembled crystalline growths that phased between states of matter, adapting to their surroundings while maintaining their alien functionality. Agent Chen joined Tom at the window, her trained stoicism giving way to genuine awe. What happens now to the ranch, to Cedar Valley, to everything? Adaptation, Tom replied simply. On both sides, the refugees need this sanctuary, but they understand the importance of minimal disruption. Their presence will be contained primarily to this property, expanding only as we develop protocols for integration. And SARD, the government? They're not just going to accept this new reality. Tom gestured toward the military perimeter, still visible beyond the property line. They don't have much choice. The dimensional changes are irreversible now, and they need what the refugees are offering, especially with the environmental challenges Earth is facing. Dr. Vasquez joined them, her scientific mind already calculating implications. There will be resistance, fear, but also incredible opportunities. The knowledge they're bringing could transform our civilization. It will, Tom confirmed, but gradually, thoughtfully. That's part of my responsibility now. Duke padded. Over, seemingly unfazed by the dramatic changes to his environment. The German shepherd had proven remarkably adaptable to the dimensional shifts, his altered genetics allowing him to perceive the refugees without distress. One of the resonants approached cautiously, its form shimmering as it attempted to generate a pattern that would be non-threatening to canine sensibilities. To everyone's surprise, Duke wagged his tail and moved forward to investigate, showing curiosity rather than fear. The resonant responded by manifesting a structure that resembled crystalline bones, which Duke sniffed with interest. "First contact," Dr. Vasquez noted with a smile. "Leave it to dogs to lead the way." As the new day established itself, Tom felt the weight of his decision and the responsibilities it entailed. He was no longer just a cattle rancher, struggling to maintain his family's legacy. He had become something more, a guardian of an emerging reality where humanity would eventually share Earth with beings from beyond dimensional boundaries. The transformation had only begun. In the coming days, weeks, and years, he would need to navigate challenges beyond anything he could imagine. Government agencies would demand control. Religious institutions would struggle with theological implications. Ordinary people would react with everything from terror to wonder. But in this moment, watching dawn break over a ranch that now served as sanctuary for beings from a dying reality, Tom Hawthorne felt a profound sense of rightness. The land that had sustained 4 generations of his family had found its true purpose, and so had he. The custodian's presence lingered at the edge of his awareness, observing but not interfering. This was Tom's path now, to guide both humans and resonance through the delicate process of learning to coexist. The future that awaited would be neither purely human nor alien, but something new, a synthesis that might eventually transcend the limitations of both. Duke returned to Tom's side, leaning against his leg in familiar companionship. Together, they watched as the first full day of a fundamentally altered reality began. Whatever came next, They would face it together, man and dog, humans and resonance, Earth and its new inhabitants, all bound by the dimensional nexus that hummed beneath the Wyoming soil. The weeks following the convergence brought challenges that tested Tom's newfound abilities as dimensional guardian. Government response had been swift and predictable. A comprehensive quarantine around the entire ranch, with military and scientific personnel establishing a research base at the perimeter. Official statements described the situation as a localized anomalous event under investigation, while social media buzzed with theories ranging from alien invasion to experimental weapons testing gone wrong. Tom had expected resistance when he refused to leave his property, but to everyone's surprise, Agent Mitchell had become his strongest advocate within the bureaucracy. After witnessing the events in the attic, she'd undergone something of a conversion, recognizing that traditional containment protocols were not only ineffective, but potentially dangerous when applied to dimensional phenomena of this magnitude. "The ranch is stable," she'd reported to her superiors, standing firm despite pressure to authorize forced evacuation. "Hawthorne's presence is maintaining that stability. Remove him and we risk catastrophic dimensional cascade." The truth was more complex than even Mitchell understood. Tom's connection to the land had deepened since the convergence, developing into a symbiotic relationship that transcended normal human environment interactions. He could feel the dimensional currents flowing beneath his feet, sense the subtle harmonics that kept the refugee colony stable, and detect potential disruptions before they manifested. The refugees themselves had proven to be more varied than initially apparent. Though sharing fundamental traits as energy pattern beings, they exhibited diversity comparable to human cultural differences. Some focused on establishing sustainable habitation structures that minimized impact on Earth's dimensional fabric. Others concentrated on adapting their knowledge to forms that could be safely shared with humanity. A smaller group devoted themselves to containing their separatist brethren, who remained in stasis but required constant monitoring. Dr. Vasquez had officially resigned from Project Looking Glass to establish what she called the Convergence research initiative on the ranch. Her small team of trusted scientists worked directly with the refugees, developing protocols for knowledge transfer that wouldn't destabilize human scientific progression. "We can't just dump their advanced physics into our academic institutions," she explained during one of their daily meetings in what had been Tom's living room and was now a hybrid conference space. "The cognitive gap is too wide. We need to create transitional frameworks that allow human understanding to evolve naturally toward these concepts." Tom agreed, his expanded consciousness giving him insight into the dangers of premature knowledge transfer. The refugees' understanding of reality operated on principles that could break human minds if encountered without preparation. Even he, with his enhanced dimensional perception, sometimes struggled to process concepts the resonance considered elementary. The separatists would have simply imposed their understanding, he noted. That's why Wilson was being physiologically modified, to serve as a bridging mechanism for concepts humans couldn't otherwise comprehend. "Speaking of Wilson," Mitchell interjected, "SARD wants to transfer him to a specialized containment facility. They believe they can reverse the modifications." Tom shook his head, feeling the discordant frequencies still emanating from Wilson's stasis field. "The changes are too fundamental. His consciousness has been partially transferred to resonant patterns. Attempting to extract it would destroy whatever remains of his humanity." "So, what do we do with him?" Mitchell asked. Tom exchanged glances with the refugee representative present at the meeting, a resonant who had adopted the name Harmony for easier human interaction. Its form maintained a loosely humanoid shape while constantly shifting through crystalline patterns that reflected its emotional states. We may be able to stabilize his hybrid state, Harmony communicated, its thoughts translating to concepts in the minds of everyone present. Not restoration, but balance between his human origin and resonant modifications. It would require his consent. Would he still be a threat? Mitchell asked. Unknown, Harmony acknowledged. The separatist influence runs deep, but containment is not a permanent solution, and termination violates our most fundamental principles. Tom sighed, feeling the weight of another difficult decision. Let's try stabilization, but under controlled conditions with full security protocols. As the meeting continued, Tom found his attention drawn to the window where Duke was interacting with a group of young residents in the yard. The refugees had shown particular interest in Earth's animals, finding their non-verbal consciousness patterns easier to connect with than human cognitive structures. Duke had become something of an ambassador, his altered genetics allowing him to perceive and respond to resonant communication. Outside, across the property, the physical transformation continued. The refugees had begun integrating their crystalline habitats with the natural landscape, creating structures that enhanced rather than replaced existing features. The old barn had become a central hub for their community. Its interior expanded beyond its physical dimensions to accommodate their needs, while its exterior maintained its traditional appearance, a symbolic preservation of the ranch's heritage. The cattle, surprisingly, had adapted well to their new neighbors. After initial wariness, they had become accustomed to the shifting crystalline forms moving through their pastures. Some even seemed to enjoy the subtle energy fields the resonance generated, gathering near their structures during inclement weather. This balanced integration represented Tom's vision for the future, not the wholesale transformation Wilson and the separatists had planned, nor the rigid segregation SRD initially demanded, but thoughtful coexistence that respected both realities. Mr. Hawthorne, Mitchell's voice pulled him back to the meeting. The Secretary of Defense is requesting a personal visit to assess the situation. How do you want to handle it? Tom considered the request carefully. High-level government interest was inevitable, but also dangerous. Political agendas could easily override scientific caution, especially with technology as potentially game-changing as what the refugees possessed. Controlled visit, he decided. Limited exposure, no direct contact with the refugees until we've fully briefed them on human political structures. And if they insist on more. Tom smiled slightly, feeling the dimensional energies humming beneath the ranch. They need to understand that this isn't a military asset or government property. It's a sanctuary with its own rules. The refugees chose this location for specific dimensional properties that can't be replicated elsewhere. Anyone who visits accepts our protocols, or they don't visit at all. Mitchell raised an eyebrow, clearly wondering when the humble cattle rancher had developed such firm diplomatic boundaries. But she nodded. I'll convey that position. They won't like it, but after what happened with Wilson, even the hardliners are proceeding with caution. As the meeting concluded, Tom stepped outside to clear his head. The Wyoming air still carried the clean scent of sage and pine, but now it was laced with something else, a subtle ozone quality produced by the refugees' energy patterns interacting with Earth's atmosphere. He walked to the ridge overlooking the northern pasture, where he'd found Dr. Vasquez during the blizzard that seemed a lifetime ago. The spot had transformed into what the refugees called a harmony node, a place where the dimensional frequencies naturally aligned to create perfect resonance between realities. Crystal formations emerged from the ground in spiraling patterns, their surfaces shifting with colors that human eyes had never evolved to perceive. As Tom stood there, he sensed a familiar presence approaching, not physically, but through the dimensional awareness he'd developed since the convergence. The custodian manifested beside him, its form more clearly visible now that Tom's perception had expanded further. Your progress exceeds expectations, the ancient entity communicated. The integration proceeds with minimal disruption to both dimensional patterns. There are challenges ahead, Tom replied, thinking of the political complications, public knowledge management, and the containment of separatists still in stasis. Earth isn't ready for full disclosure yet. No dimensional transition is without difficulty, the custodian acknowledged. But the pattern established here creates possibility for longer-term stability than most convergences achieve. Tom turned to the cosmic observer, asking the question that had lingered since their first encounter. Why my family? Why this land? Out of all the places on Earth, why did the convergence happen here? The custodian's form shifted, displaying patterns that suggested contemplation. Dimensional nexus points are not random. They form where certain quantum frequencies naturally align. Your ancestors were drawn to this location because their genetic structure resonated with these frequencies. Over generations, this mutual influence strengthened until your bloodline became inextricably connected to this specific point in the multiversal structure. You're saying we were changed by the land as much as we changed it. Precisely. Humans conceptualize genetics as fixed inheritance, but consciousness and environment engage in constant exchange at quantum levels. Your family's long stewardship of this convergence point produced adaptations that eventually manifested in your ability to serve as dimensional guardian. The explanation aligned with what Tom had intuited since the convergence, that his connection to the ranch transcended normal human attachment to property. He wasn't just a farmer who happened to inherit land with special properties. He was the culmination of a generations-long process of mutual adaptation between his bloodline and this specific nexus of reality. And the artifacts my grandfather collected? Resonance stabilizers, the custodian explained. Fragments from previous dimensional transitions that found their way to nexus points across your planet. Your grandfather recognized their significance on levels beyond his conscious understanding. By gathering them here, he strengthened the convergence point and created the conditions necessary for successful transition. Tom absorbed this information, feeling its truth resonate with his expanded awareness. It explained why his grandfather's obsession with the strange objects hadn't seemed entirely irrational, even when the family had dismissed it as eccentricity. On some level, Marcus Hawthorne had understood their purpose, even if he lacked the conceptual framework to articulate it. There is something else you should know, the custodian continued. This convergence is unique, not just in its stability, but in its timing. Earth's reality is approaching a critical development phase, what you might call an evolutionary threshold. The knowledge the refugees bring could determine whether your species successfully navigates this transition. What kind of threshold? Consciousness expansion beyond biological limitations. Many civilizations reach this juncture and fail, either through self-destruction or dimensional calcification. The refugees' understanding of consciousness-reality interaction offers a pathway that few Earth species would discover independently. The implications were staggering. Tom had assumed the convergence was primarily about providing sanctuary for beings from a collapsing dimension. Now he understood it served Earth's evolution as much as it served the refugees' survival. The exchange wasn't charity, but symbiosis, each reality offering what the other critically needed. How do I manage this? Tom asked, feeling the weight of responsibility settling more heavily on his shoulders. I'm just one person. You are not alone, the custodian reminded him. The refugees bring not only knowledge, but experience in guiding dimensional transitions, and there are others among your kind with latent capabilities similar to yours, individuals whose genetics resonate with different nexus points across your planet. In time, they will awaken to their roles as this convergence expands its influence. A network of guardians, Tom mused, a possibility if chosen freely. Imposed structure leads to exactly the kind of domination the separatists sought. True dimensional harmony requires balance between guidance and autonomic development. As the custodian faded from perception, Tom remained on the ridge, processing everything he'd learned. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Managing the integration of refugee knowledge without disrupting human development would require careful judgment, containing the separatist influence while respecting the complex ethics of consciousness. Manipulation presented its own challenges, and eventually, the public would need to be prepared for the reality of dimensional convergence, a revelation that would transform humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. But for now, the immediate concerns were more practical. The ranch needed to function not just as a dimensional sanctuary, but as a working farm. The cattle still required care, fences needed mending, and the daily rhythms of agricultural life continued despite the profound changes taking place. Tom descended from the ridge, heading toward the barn where Dr. Vasquez had established her research center. As he walked, he noticed new crystal formations emerging from the soil, evidence that the refugees were expanding their habitation structures underground to minimize visible impact on the landscape. Inside the barn, the interior space had been transformed. What once housed farm equipment now contained sophisticated laboratories where human and resonant researchers worked side by side. The dimensional physics at play allowed the interior to exist partially outside conventional space-time, creating more room than the exterior dimensions would suggest possible. Dr. Vasquez looked up from a workstation where she was examining what appeared to be a three-dimensional model of DNA, though it contained far more complexity than any representation Tom had seen before. "We've made a breakthrough," she announced, her exhaustion evident but overridden by excitement. "The refugees have helped us understand why certain human individuals exhibit heightened sensitivity to dimensional phenomena. There's a specific genetic marker, they call it a resonance sequence, that appears in varying concentrations throughout the human population." "Let me guess," Tom said. "The Hawthorne family has it in abundance." She nodded. "Highest concentration we've found so far, but you're not unique. We've identified similar markers in individuals scattered across the globe, though most remain unaware of their potential. It explains historical accounts of people with unusual sensitivities to what were once dismissed as supernatural phenomena." Tom considered the implications. The custodian mentioned others who might serve as guardians at different nexus points. Dr. Vasquez's eyes widened. "You've had further contact with that entity?" "Tom, we need to document everything about these interactions. The custodian represents a level of dimensional existence we've barely begun to comprehend." "Later," Tom promised. "Right now, we need to focus on the immediate challenges. How are the refugees adapting to our reality?" "Better than expected," she replied, gesturing toward a section of the lab where resonance worked with specialized equipment. "Their physiological adaptation is proceeding smoothly thanks to the resonance fields you've established. The psychological adaptation is more complex. They're experiencing individual existence in ways their collective consciousness never prepared them for." Tom had noticed this phenomenon during his interactions with the refugees. In their original dimension, the resonance had existed in a state of partial consciousness sharing, their individual identities blending at the edges with their collective awareness. Earth's dimensional properties enforced stronger boundaries between entities, requiring them to develop more defined self-concepts. Harmony mentioned they find it both liberating and frightening, Tom noted. like suddenly developing distinct senses after experiencing the world only through vibration. As they spoke, an alert sounded from one of the monitoring stations. A technician approached quickly, her expression concerned. "Dr. Vasquez, we're detecting unusual activity in the stasis field containing the separatists. The resonance patterns are destabilizing." Tom immediately extended his awareness toward the containment area established in what had once been his equipment shed. The dimensional barriers felt wrong, thinning in places where they should remain strongest. "Someone's interfering with the containment field," he announced, already moving toward the exit. "External influence, not from within." "Wilson?" Dr. Vasquez asked, following closely. "No, his stasis remains stable. This is different. A new frequency pattern I haven't encountered before." They rushed across the property, where security personnel had already established a perimeter around the equipment shed. Duke joined them, sensing Tom's urgency, his hackles raised as he detected the dimensional disturbance. Agent Mitchell met them at the perimeter, her hand resting on her sidearm. "Our sensors picked it up 5 minutes ago. Energy signature doesn't match anything in our database." Tom focused his perception on the shed. Through his enhanced awareness, he could see ripples in reality surrounding the structure. Not the harmonious patterns of refugee resonance, but jagged, forceful distortions that suggested deliberate interference. "It's coming from outside our dimension," he realized. "The separatists have allies we didn't account for." How is that possible?" Mitchell demanded. "You said the convergence was complete, the transition finished." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scientific mind already processing implications. "The primary convergence is complete, but dimensional boundaries remain thinner around the nexus." He pointed. "If entities with sufficient power exist in adjacent realities, they might be able to exert influence across these thinned regions." As if in confirmation of her theory, the air around the shed shimmered violently. A spiral pattern formed in the space above the structure, rotating with increasing speed until it resembled a miniature tornado composed of crystalline fragments rather than air. "Everyone back!" Tom ordered, recognizing the signature of a forced, dimensional breach. "Mitchell, evacuate all non-essential personnel to minimum safe distance." The security teams responded immediately, falling back to established evacuation positions while maintaining observation posts at the perimeter. Tom stood his ground, extending his awareness to assess the nature of the breach. What he discovered chilled him to the core. The external influence wasn't coming from the resonance original dimension, but from somewhere else entirely. A reality with fundamentally different properties, one whose patterns felt jarringly discordant with both Earth and the refugees' homeland. "Interdimensional predators," he murmured, understanding dawning. "The separatists made contact with entities from a hostile dimension. That's where they got their enhancement technologies." Harmony materialized beside him, its crystalline form pulsing with urgent patterns. "Void harvesters," it communicated, the concept carrying layers of ancient terror. "They consume failing dimensions, accelerating collapse to feed on released energies. Our separatists believed they could control them, use them as weapons. They were wrong. And now they've found us," Tom concluded. The spiral above the shed collapsed inward, forming a dark aperture that defied natural light. Through this opening, something began to emerge, not a physical form, but a distortion in reality itself, a moving void that consumed dimensional integrity wherever it touched. Tom felt the land respond to the intrusion, the nexus point beneath the ranch pulsing with protective resonance. Generations of Hawthorne stewardship had created defense mechanisms within the property itself, dimensional antibodies reacting to invasion. "The ranch is fighting back," he observed, feeling the energy flowing up through his connection to the land. It recognizes the threat. Dr. Vasquez stared in astonishment as the soil around the shed began to crystallize, forming patterns identical to those in the resonant habitation structures. The refugees' integration with the land is more complete than we realized. They've established a symbiotic relationship with the nexus point. The void harvester fully emerged from the aperture, its non-form spreading like ink through water, as it sought to corrupt local dimensional integrity. Where it touched the crystallized ground, the structures briefly darkened before pulsing with renewed luminescence, rejecting the intrusion. Tom knew instinctively what needed to be done. This wasn't a threat that could be contained or negotiated with. The harvesters existed solely to consume, with no capacity for communication or compromise. The protection of two dimensions now depended on its complete rejection. He stepped forward, channeling the nexus energy flowing through his genetic resonance. Duke remained at his side, the dog's altered biology allowing him to serve as a secondary conduit for the dimensional energies. "I need the core," Tom called back to Dr. Vasquez. "The original one from the attic." She nodded, dispatching a researcher to retrieve the device. Meanwhile, the void harvester continued its advance, probing the crystalline defenses for weaknesses. Each breach attempt was met with resistance, but Tom could feel the protective resonance straining under repeated assaults. "The separatists, in stasis?" Mitchell asked urgently. "Are they communicating with this thing?" Harmony's form flickered with agitation. "Not consciously, but their modified resonance patterns serve as beacons, drawing the harvesters to this dimensional coordinate. They were altered specifically for this purpose, to serve as transition points for invasion." The researcher returned with the resonance core, which had been kept in a specialized containment field since the convergence. As Tom took it in his hands, the device activated immediately, responding to his touch with a flood of energy that connected him more deeply to the nexus point. With this enhanced connection, Tom could perceive the true nature of the threat. The void harvester wasn't simply an interdimensional predator. It was a probe, the equivalent of a sensory appendage extending from a much larger entity that remained poised at the edge of perceptible reality. If this advanced scout succeeded in establishing a foothold, it would open the way for something far worse. "Everyone clear the area," Tom instructed, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he was speaking from multiple points in space-time simultaneously. "What happens? Next, we'll reshape local dimensional parameters." As the others retreated to safe distance, Tom focused his consciousness through the core, connecting directly to the defensive systems embedded in the ranch. Duke pressed against his leg, the dog's altered genetics serving as a grounding mechanism that prevented Tom's consciousness from becoming lost in the vastness of interdimensional awareness. The void harvester sensed the concentration of energy and turned its attention directly to Tom. It surged forward, abandoning its methodical, probing for a direct assault on what it perceived as the primary threat. As it approached, reality warped around it, colors inverting and physical laws temporarily suspending. Tom stood firm, allowing the defensive energies to flow through him without resistance. He wasn't fighting the harvester directly. He was becoming a conduit for the Nexus Point's natural immune response, a cellular defense mechanism operating on a dimensional scale. The moment of contact was both instantaneous and eternal. Tom experienced it as a cascade of possibilities, realities where the harvester succeeded, where it failed, where different choices led to wildly divergent outcomes. But through it all, one constant remained: the land remembers. 4 generations of Hawthorns had imprinted their stewardship on this nexus point, creating a dimensional identity that rejected foreign invasion at the most fundamental level. The harvester recoiled as it encountered this rejection. Its non-form rippled with distortions that suggested pain or confusion. It attempted to adapt, changing its resonance patterns to bypass the defenses, but the nexus point responded with equal flexibility, shifting its protective frequencies to maintain integrity. Tom directed the core's energy toward the dimensional aperture from which the harvester had emerged. The device responded by emitting a concentrated beam of resonance that struck the opening, causing it to fluctuate wildly before beginning to contract. The harvester, sensing its retreat being cut off, abandoned its assault on Tom and surged back toward the failing aperture. As it reached the opening, the core's energy peaked, collapsing the dimensional passage with a silent implosion that briefly inverted all colors on the ranch before reality snapped back to normal parameters. The threat had been contained, but Tom knew it wasn't defeated. The entity behind the harvester remained in its home dimension, aware now of Earth's location in the multiversal structure. The separatists in stasis still served as potential beacons for future incursions. As the defensive energies dissipated, Tom felt the toll of channeling such power. His consciousness contracted back to human limitations, though forever altered by the experience. He swayed slightly, steadying himself against Duke's solid presence. Dr. Vasquez approached cautiously, her scientific detachment temporarily overcome by genuine awe. What just happened? The ranch defended itself, Tom explained, his voice returning to normal. With some help, the nexus point has its own protective mechanisms developed over generations of Hawthorne stewardship. I just helped direct them. Mitchell joined them, surveying the crystallized ground, where normal grass was already beginning to reassert itself. And the harvester thing? Rejected for now, but not destroyed. It will report back to whatever sent it. We need to prepare for the possibility of future attempts. And the separatists. Tom turned his attention to the equipment shed, where the stasis field had stabilized again. They need to be relocated. Their modified resonance patterns are too dangerous to keep here even in containment. We need a location without dimensional significance, where they can be gradually rehabilitated. As they discussed next steps, Harmony approached, its form having shifted to a more complex configuration that reflected new understanding. What you did was thought impossible among our kind, it communicated. Direct rejection of a void harvester without dimensional collapse. We have much to learn from your methods. Tom smiled wearily. And we have much to learn from yours. That's the point of all this, isn't it? Exchange, growth, evolution through cooperation rather than consumption. The sun had reached its zenith over the Hawthorne Ranch, illuminating a landscape forever changed yet somehow more itself than ever before. The crystal formations had begun to retract, returning to harmony with the natural environment rather than standing apart from it. The refugees moved through the fields, their forms adapting to Earth's dimensional parameters while maintaining their essential nature. In the distance, the military perimeter remained, a reminder of the complicated relationship between this sanctuary and the wider world. Eventually, the truth would need to be shared beyond these boundaries, carefully, thoughtfully, with preparations for the profound paradigm shifts it would trigger in human understanding. But for now, Tom was content to focus on the immediate needs of his unusual community. The cattle still required tending, the fences still needed mending, Duke still deserved his evening walk along the ridge. And within these ordinary rhythms, extraordinary changes would continue to unfold at their own pace. As he headed toward the house with Duke at his side, Tom felt a deep certainty that transcended rational thought. The convergence hadn't been an ending or a beginning, but a continuation, another chapter in a story that had been unfolding since his great-grandfather first stood on this land and felt something call to him across dimensional boundaries. The Hawthorne Ranch had found its true purpose, and so had he. Guardian, farmer, dimensional anchor, all aspects of a role he had been born to fill without knowing it. And whatever challenges came next, he would face them with the same quiet, Determination that had guided 4 generations of his family through the unpredictable rhythms of life on the high plains of Wyoming. Behind him, the crystalline structures caught the midday light, sending prismatic reflections across the transformed landscape. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time since the storm that had brought Dr. Vasquez to his door, Tom Hawthorne felt not just ready, but eager to discover what came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.